Our guest today has spent his career preserving the sounds and soul of the national pastime. Kirk McKnight is the author of The Voices of Baseball, a book that tells the story of the game not through the box scores or highlight reels, but through the broadcasters who brought baseball to life for generations of fans. By gathering the memories, insights, and unforgettable calls from some of the most respected voices in the sport, Kirk offers a unique oral history of baseball, one ballpark, one booth, one voice at a time. If you ever felt the moment was bigger because of how it was called, you already understand the power of Kirk's work. We are thrilled to welcome to Baseball and BBQ, Kirk McKnight. Welcome, Kirk.
Welcome, Kirk.
Hey, thank you guys. Glad to be
Kirk,
here.
it's great to have you back. You have the distinct pleasure, and I don't know, or honor. It might not be your pleasure, but I don't know how many authors we've had on, but we've never had an author come back for the same book. We've had plenty of authors that have written additional books, and we've brought them back. But you are back. You were with us on episode 201, and we enjoyed it so much. I guess because it's as podcasters, we probably are. Uh, you know, we want to be we want to be broadcasters. Your
Right.
book is fantastic. It's
Thanks.
updated, and so one thing that we spoke about on episode 201, and I know in this book you have a tribute to him. We spoke about the greatness of Vin Scully, and I thought about it a lot after you were on, and I thought about the announcers that I've grown up with and how I enjoy them, and I think we talked about that, how when you grow up with announcers or they're part of your daily watching of a sport or listening to a sport, you kind of enjoy them and they become part of your favorites. But Vince Scully, without a doubt, I listened to him a lot after we spoke. We don't have the privilege of hearing him because he was in L.A., but there is no one better. And you have a tribute in the book to him. You had we talked about him before, but I'd like to talk about him again since the last time you were on, he passed away. Let's talk about Vince Scully, please.
Yeah, and that's the power of Vince Scully. Let me just explain a little bit about this updated edition. Is that I submitted the manuscript of the updated edition of the Voices of Hockey to the publisher on August 1st of 2022, and Vin passes away the very next day. So I am on the phone with my editor the next day and thinking, okay, there is a rhyme and reason for everything right now, but the timing of this could not be any more clear for me. I would like to do something to pay homage to Vin. Um, and if we need to cut other parts of the book, if we need to cut the chapter that's on the ballparks of yesterday, cut the voices of yesterday, whatever it needs to be, can we please do it? Editor says, you have 2 weeks. Well, I was already emailing people that very day. I had people like Marv Albert emailing me back within an hour or two. Doc Emmerich, I'm talking about a couple of hockey voices, but the more I reached out to different voices from the voices of baseball, the more the responses came in, and I feel like now I think I have 45 different people who have given their moments of remembrances and also just fond memories and most of all just their reflections on Ben as a person. And this includes many Hall of Famers. So I was just blown away by just the timing of it all. And I wanted to give reverence to the fact that the greatest broadcaster who ever lived has passed away, but also noting the fact that this has to be in the book. This is updated. This is really kind of breaking news, and this is a perfect time to really give him the homage that he is most worthy of.
Yeah, I'm looking at the back of the book where you have all these, like you said, all the people who we're back to Marv Albert and Bob Costas and Michael Kay and Chip Carey. How difficult was it to gather all that in the what you say, a 2 week period you had that time to do?
It really wasn't difficult at all because they'd already interviewed a lot of these guys for the book the first time around and for the updated edition. And so, not to mention the fact that there was about 5 or 6 different broadcasters that I had already interviewed who, you know, there was a Living Legends chapter in the original edition of the Voices of Baseball. So with that Living Legends chapter, obviously talking a lot about Vince Scully. So I probably would say maybe 6 or 7 were already, you know, interviews that were already taking place, and you really couldn't embellish it any better than the way they had put it. And so, you know, but like I said, just putting that out there and saying these are the people I've talked to. I gave an example in the email too, because one of my favorite things was Euchre, who's now passed away as well. But Euchre, when I talked to him, it wasn't that long before Vin passed away. But Euchre said, you know, I'm friends with Vin Scully, and I used to, whenever I'd see Vin, I would apologize for him having to call the games in which I played. And so, you know, a quick little Bob Euchre kind of obviously quote. And I shared that as an example. And of course, Marv ate it up. Like he's like, that was great. And he gave his own story. But that's kind of the way I do with things is I give a little sample of something. I say, you know, who I've already talked to. Obviously, these are people that know, you know, who I've talked to already. They are included among that list of who I've talked to. And so it was, especially if somebody's wanting to really have that opportunity to throw out into the world, maybe some kind of way of thanking Vin for his, you know, influence or his presence in their life. Several stories, you know, firsthand stories, personal experiences, phone calls, voicemails that they had received from Vin, you name it, a card of condolences when one's father had passed away, something like that. You don't really have to go far to rustle up some kind of memory. I have my own personal memory of when I interviewed Vin Scully. And so as when somebody's in broadcasting for 67 years, obviously that's going to be, he obviously touches a lot of lives and he comes into contact with a lot of people. His farewell season in 2016, I think this is, if you don't mind me just sharing this, I'm kind of going on a little tangent here, but one of my favorite parts of the Vin Scully tribute was when I talked to Charlie Steiner about broadcasting alongside Vin. One of the things he said was, during 2016, another broadcaster was calling it a career in 2016. That was Dick Enberg. Somebody who had been broadcasting for 60 years. And you know, Dick Enberg, when I'd spoken with him that year, he gave me some Vin stuff and everything like that in 2016. But during that 2016 year, wherever Vin was, they were giving him the, you know, preferential treatment. They were making a chair to sit out on his deck in, made out of baseball bats. You know, just everywhere he went, the fanfare was just ridiculous. And Charlie went up to Dick Enberg when the Padres were playing the Dodgers, and he said, "This just encapsulates everything." He said, "Buddy, you picked the wrong year to retire."
The one thing about Vince Scully, which blows me away, it's not a stat, it's more like a tidbit or whatever, but he was inducted into the Broadcasters Wing in Cooperstown Baseball Hall of Fame after 33 years of being, it got the Lifetime Achievement Award after 33 years, and then goes on to broadcast another 34 years. That is just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about other sports, and there was a guy named Bob Chase who broadcasts minor league hockey. In fact, he was one of Doc Emmerich of the of the Devils and of the national broadcast. He was one of his biggest mentors, I guess, and people he looked up to. And I think even he didn't quite make it to 60 years. Dick Enberg made it to about 60 years as a broadcaster, but I don't think you're ever going to see somebody go 67.
Right.
And Vin Scully had to do baseball because baseball lends itself to storytelling. You have the long pauses between, well, you used to have long pauses between pitches, but you've got the innings, you've got changing pitchers, you've got, it's still, it gives you time to tell stories. He couldn't have been a hockey announcer or a basketball announcer. That wasn't him. You know, he was in the perfect place, perfect time, and multi generations grew up with him and they loved him. And I have listened to that call so many times since we discussed it, and I had heard it before when Hank Aaron hit his historic home run. That is one of the greatest calls ever.
Yeah, and the fact that lending to it was that he basically gave radio silence, as far as from his perspective, for about a minute and a quarter before he stepped into it, because that's just the beauty of Vin is knowing when to step in on a moment and when not to, and when to let the crowd tell the story. And I think a lot of broadcasters take that tutelage into their own broadcasts and get in this motion, or in this kind of sense where it's like, what am I going to do that's going to tell this story better than right now? Because the crowd's obviously bleeding into the microphone. Sometimes the booth is shaking because the whole stadium is raucous.
Right.
And so what are you going to do to top that? What are you going to say to better, encapsulate that moment?
Okay, so that we did talk about Vin in our last discussion, but he definitely warrants further conversation. So now you have I read that the book 14, I think 14 new announcers in here, something, right? Tell us
Right.
what is new about this book and the highlights so that we can get people to go out and buy their second copy.
Well, one of the things that's new about it is there was no euchre in the original edition. So anytime you can bring Bob Euchre into it, he's basically the opener of the book. His story about how he started broadcasting by himself goes back to when he was Tom Harmon, I believe is his name, and he was in the booth with him and one other person who I can't remember. But basically, they got up, left the booth, left him alone. He's sitting there holding the cough switch down, just begging for them to come back into the booth. And he is just out of his mind with anxiety. And there's a little bit of quietness just soaking in the moment. And all of a sudden, his producer says, "Bob, we're live." There's, it's like, it's 1-1, like he's basically telling them, you got to say something here. And that's kind of like Bob Euchre's baptism into broadcasting. And with his passing, obviously that's another thing since our last conversation. Euchre passed away, and so has Tim McCarver. And so thinking of those two broadcasters, and he's another one of the new voices in the updated edition, and their acumen, if you will, it really lends to just the presence of a broadcaster. I think a lot of people, and we probably didn't talk about this in the last show, but on the air, and Joe Buck talked about this in his own book. I interviewed Joe for this book. Now he's a Hall of Famer. A couple of there's maybe 2 or 3 new Hall of Famers that are on the cast that have, weren't Hall of Famers when we last talked. So like now there's like 16 Hall of Famers featured in the Voices of Baseball. The only living Hall of Famer who's not in the book is Al Michaels. And I'm working on that for the audio edition. I'm working on getting him to give me a Vin story for the audio edition when it comes out, hopefully a few months down the road. But speaking of Tim McCarver, when he was calling the 2001 World Series, Joe Buck is sitting there and Joe's on lead, but Tim said something that was very prophetic,
because I know exactly where you're going.
Right.
I know
the problem
exactly where you're
with
going.
Playing your infield in on a pitcher like Mariano Rivera is that he jams these hitters up, and they can get those bloops basically into the deeper part of the infield. And exactly after he said that, that's exactly what happened.
And in comes the winning run.
The winning run. I mean, and Joe Buck, basically, while he's calling that, he is high-fiving Tim McCarver because Tim just set it up just prophetically. And those are the kinds of things that's why you bring a former player like Tim McCarver in to be in a broadcast. David Cohn and Tim mentions David Cohn when I interviewed him. He mentioned David Cohn as being a great broadcaster who also was a former player, because they have the insight and they have basically the experience to try to guess at something. And if they're right, then they're right. If they're not, it's fine. But a lot of times they are going to be right. And Tim nailed it right there on the air, almost as prophetic as you can get.
Yep, and I tell people, my son, listen to that broadcast, listen to the end of that game, because that was amazing the way he knew that. I see you in, Len and I are Met fans, and I see you interviewed, I know we talked about this last time, Harry Rose and Wayne Hagen, who Wayne Hagen has moved on to another team, or I don't know if he moved on to another team, but you don't have Gary, Keith, and Ron in here. Gary Cohn, Keith Fernandez, and Ron Darling. Have you had a chance to try to get them into the book?
I mean, I've tried it. Basically, I kind of don't want to go more and more if they don't really respond or I don't get a reply. I tried again for the second round. I actually talked to Howie because between the first and second editions of the book, the Mets had quite a few things going for them. They went to the World Series, and so I obviously added to that. But as time goes on, and I'm just revamping a book, even adding new announcers, if they're not, if the train's going by and I'm trying to get somebody to join the cast and be part of that, and I don't hear back from them, I just take what I'm working with, and obviously with the broadcasters that I've spoken with, like Howie Rose, I was able to lock it down and to add the chapter that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Speaking about Howie Rose, did you interview him for your other book, The Voices of Hockey?
I did. Yeah, he used to broadcast for the Islanders and for the Rangers.
And for the Rangers,
Right.
yes.
Oh, yeah. He has a very famous call. I'm going to butcher it, but it was Stefan Matteau. Stefan, right, when the Rangers win
Right.
the
Yeah.
cup, right? I did butcher it, but it's close enough.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's that rivalry right there. To be able to talk about that rivalry and to talk with two teams, both the the Rangers and the Devils. Those are two pretty beefy chapters as far as personnel go, and it's great to have that, because that is a very solid rivalry. The Hudson River rivalry is still strong. You still have line brawls every once in a while when those two teams play, and those things are really kind of not happening so much in the sport and have it for a while, but they still show up, and that's when you show that the rivalry is still alive and kicking.
We interviewed Steve Albert and Kenny Albert. We're still trying to get Marv Albert. That's a hard one to get. And Al Albert.
Well, I guess I should consider myself lucky then.
That's right.
Yeah.
I've gotten him twice.
That is good. It's very funny because, first of all, how many editions of the book can you have? I mean, it's right. Gary, Keith, and Ron's loss, basically. If they're not cooperating or whatever, it's they're losing out, because this book, and we are talking with Kirk McKnight. It's the updated version of The Voices of Baseball. The game's greatest broadcasters reflect on America's pastime, and right on the cover is the gentleman we talked about before, Vince Scully. This is kind of the way, I mean, this is like I consider our show. It becomes an archive. It becomes a history of people that, whether they're extremely famous or not or whatever, gives a history, and it's something that is permanent. That's what this book is. You've written an ode to announcers, a history of announcers, and being in this book is almost an honor. It is an honor. So the fact that they're not in it is a shame, because they're considered in this area, one of the best three-men booths, or one of the best booths, because I don't know that all these other teams don't have three men, but three-person booth in baseball, and they should be part of this. It's a shame that they're not, and that's not your fault. It's their fault. But this is a history, and I recommend this book for anyone who's grown up with baseball, who loves to hear the announcers. Who this is a great piece of history, Kirk. So thank you for writing
Thank
this.
you. Yeah, thank you. And like let's not be too hard on Cohen and Darling and everybody there in the Mets booth, because uh, they're very busy, and sometimes it's
Yeah.
like in the hands of the media relations guy, whether or not
Yes.
a message gets by or
Yeah.
not. And so I do throw it out there. I do try to. When you get to have upwards of 30, 40, or 50 broadcasters, you start to see how many plates you're spinning on
Right.
sticks, and you're starting to think, okay, like or how many fires are starting, or how many burners you got going on the stove. So I not anything against those guys. I would love to have them
Of
in
course.
there.
Of course.
If we do get to a point where the book's going to go to audio, I might actually just reach out again and say, do you have a Vin story? Because I'm sure those guys have plenty have a Vin story they can share, because that's what's going to be is in the audio is people like Jaime Jardín, Hall of Fame broadcaster for the Dodgers in Spanish, and also guys who didn't get around the first time, who have been able to get on, and including minor league broadcasters like Joshua Suchon for the Albuquerque Isotopes, which I'm pretty sure I butchered that last name, but
It's okay.
he worked with the Dodgers, and even he had a Vin story, because Vin just talked to everybody. So, your pregame, your segment guy, whoever, he was a part of the team. You obviously ran into Vin. He always made it a special. He went out of his way to make himself known, and not make himself known. Not that sounds a little like crass on his part. No, to make you feel comfortable, make
Right.
you feel
Yes.
welcome.
Yes.
Basically, that's what I should say. Not to make his presence known, but to make
Yeah.
your presence accounted for and acknowledged. And not a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people have the time to do that. I've been plenty enough press booths in both hockey and baseball to realize that those guys are are just really just on the move constantly. And so to imagine somebody who's at the top of the list as far as broadcasting go to take that time out of their humongously busy, tremendously busy, humongously, that's probably not the word to say, but tremendously busy schedules, to take that time to have you into their booth, or to
Right.
duck his head into your booth and say hello. And there was a lot of broadcasters who had that happen. I can go on and on. One of my favorite stories is Chip Carey, obviously grandson of Harry Carey and son of Skip Carey. So these are all broadcasters whom Vin knew very well, and so he was able to see, uh, obviously, broadcast alongside or against Harry in St. Louis and Chicago, uh, broadcast against Skip in those years when Skip broadcast for the Braves. And here's Chip. And Chip basically doing his opener, little uncomfortable, just like this is him getting set into the booth. I think this was in the 98 season. And he does his opener, and he basically turns around and look who was watching the whole time. It was Vin, and he's holding a cup of coffee, and he just like lips, and Chip can see what he says. He says, "Welcome to the club," and for Chip, that just meant the world, to basically have that kind of confirmation from somebody like Vin, and especially considering the state he was in just a few minutes earlier, going into that opener, to introduce the segment. So to me, like, it's like the blessing of the dawn. It's like, okay, thank you. Vin approves. Here we go.
Well, I loved the story you told about when I guess we're Vin should be a whole episode. When he called you and you knew right away, you saw it was an LA area code, but even if it wasn't, you would have known. And he says, "Hi, this is Vince Scully," and you were thinking, "Yeah, like I don't know that." I
And
mean,
then he
he
goes
was
on.
he
Oh,
was
go ahead.
not full of himself at all. I mean, he was so down to earth, and that wasn't an act at all. He was that everything you read about him. That's the kind of person he was.
He said he's like, "Hey, Kirk, I'm Vince Scully. I broadcast baseball for the Los Angeles Dodgers." This is a guy who is returning a call who was basically given the note from the media relations guy. There's a person who is writing a book on baseball broadcasting. He would love to speak with you. So this has been reaching out to that preface, which is me, of a journalist looking to do a book on baseball broadcasters, and he explains himself and what he does and where he does. That was
Well,
perfect. It's like you said, when he said hello, I knew who he was. He
I
said
mean,
hello, and I was like, and that's where my heart skipped right there. When he said hello, I was like, I'm talking with Vince Scully.
well, Kirk, he didn't want you to confuse him with the Vin Scully that the auto mechanic that was working on your car. He's Vin Scully, and
That's
he
right.
didn't want you to confuse it.
That's right.
Kirk,
Totally.
could you talk about Dave Van Horn and his Olympic Stadium experience? Because Olympic Stadium, if anybody who doesn't remember, it was the home of the Montreal Expos before the Expos moved to Washington.
So Dave Van Horn was a perfect lesson for me to basically not to just expect the unexpected. Because when I went in to interview Dave Van Horn, my original intention obviously was to talk with somebody to represent the Miami Marlins and talk about the ballpark, which is now called Lone Depot Park, whatever. So I'm thinking, okay, this is obviously a new ballpark. There's not going to be much to talk about. Here we go. But obviously, now I'm talking to a Hall of Famer, basically doing up the research prior to the interview, realizing that I can talk to him about the Montreal Expos. And that to me was just like, oh man, it just brought the pressure on. What I thought was going to be a simple, okay, just give me some experience to share. Great. Turned into, I'm talking with a Hall of Famer. I'm talking about a team of yesteryear with so much history. And obviously he became a big part of the book in the ballparks of yesteryear. And that whole, Olympic Stadium is such a big part of that chapter of this is was it's a Talking Heads reference. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Talking Heads, but there's a song called Nothing But Flowers, and I tweaked the lyrics a little bit because he says somewhere in the song he says, this was a factory, now it's turned into a cornfield. There's another part where he says this was a parking lot. So I changed the chapter's name to be This Was an Outfield, or This Was a Parking Lot, now it's turned into an outfield. My ode to David Byrne and the Talking Heads, one of my favorite bands of all time. So that was such a big part of that chapter, the Olympic Stadium, because of everything that it meant, and seeing the downward spiral starting in '94 with the player strike and just kind of a slow death of baseball there, and finding out about Olympic Stadium, because I liken Olympic Stadium to just like a base or a soda can's top. The way they tried to do that whole, open and close roof, it just reminds me of like opening and closing a can of soda or something. But the personality of Olympic Stadium, because of the cold weather up there and that cement, that cold just soaks in there, and that just has such an effect on the way the game is played those early moments of the season. People need to realize that not just outdoor ballparks have that inclement weather affecting the play of the game. Indoor ballparks, even though the outside is not, you're not in snow, you're not in rain, you have a temperature that you can control with the AC and all that, but that cement that just sits there freezing in those winter months, and the way that has the effect on the bounce of the ball or a lot of things like that, that is the science of baseball. And those are the things that Dave Van Horn taught me, and that in our interview, aside from all that he shared about the Marlins, but to kind of get a visual for what it would be like as a player to play in Olympic Stadium. And obviously also, the fandom wasn't there after '94. That really broke the back of that city as far as the momentum that was going. I'm still seeing memes and things on Facebook talking about, people would have signs, I think, that say World Series champs 1994, because that's how they felt like they were heading with that. I think they were 74-40. So a couple of things got preserved with that player strike, and one of those is the Atlanta Braves division championship string. That would have been cut off at like 2 or 3 if they would have like gone on, if that season would have played out, and Atlanta wouldn't have caught up with Montreal. And then who knows what would happen moving forward from there. The Braves obviously went on to win another 9 or 10, maybe even more than that, division titles in a row after that strike shortened season.
Yeah, that was terrible. Absolutely terrible for Mets fans.
Yeah.
Before they moved to Olympic Stadium, Jerry Park, I can't believe that they were playing in, it was a 28,000 seat stadium, like a minor league ballpark, and it's freezing up there.
And it's like in a corner of an actual city park, right? It's
Yeah,
almost like here's this fixture in this city park. It just so happens to be a 28,000 seat venue for baseball. I mean, that's crazy. How would that? Imagine being in Central Park and all of a sudden, something the size of a few thousand less than Fenway Park, just right in the middle of Central Park. It's crazy.
exactly.
Yeah, we do a new show. It's called the NYS Halls of Fame. And our first episode was an interview with David Palmer, who played for the Montreal Expos, who as a kid would take the road trips to Jerry Park. So we were talking about that with him. It held fond memories for him, but maybe not so much for other Expo fans.
Yeah, it's interesting going back a couple of stadiums in the book in that parking lot chapter, just because you think that it was just the last one, that was it, and you realize that some of these stadiums, to get a team there, they had to have somewhere to put them, and to keep them there, they had to build something better. Uh, Minnesota is a perfect example of that. The weather, obviously, in Metropolitan Park, uh, obviously an outdoor ballpark, tends to have an effect on the game, the way the game is played. So they moved them indoors, shared the Metrodome with the Vikings all those years, and now they're outdoors. The Vikings are not.
Right.
So they decided to go the route of the outdoor ballpark again. But that's what I'm saying. Just some of these early days of the team. Arlington Stadium's another example of that with the Texas Rangers. There's 3 ballparks of Texas Rangers that are now in the book now because of Arlington Stadium and what's now called Choctaw Stadium, I think, the old Globe Life and Park and ballpark and Globe Life Field. Now it's Globe Life Field, which the open and close thing. But there are a few examples of that where just a temporary, hold it over, get something permanent. Realize that permanent thing after a while is aged, is dated. Let's get something else. That's how quickly baseball can change on you. That's another thing in the book, by the way, guys, is Globe Life Field in Texas. Texas winning the championship in 2023. You can tell that there was an obvious shift for the Texas Rangers in having that new ballpark. The Globe Life Park in the ballpark in Arlington, that's what it is. Then they changed it to Globe Life Park in Arlington. But it was like playing on the moon, is what Brian Bannister called it, because the ball just flew out of there. Those hot summer winds, hot, summer nights, obviously a hitter's ballpark, but and the sun was just killing the grass. There was just a lot of things that the sun and the heat was affecting. They move it indoors so they can kind of have that alternative kind of way, basically have those options. And all of a sudden now it becomes not necessarily a foolproof pitcher's park, but you see how well the Rangers are doing, especially in 2023 with pitching, getting some of the hot hands in there and really showing how they can be a pitching first team. And that's what, obviously got them 11 straight wins in 2023 on the road to win that championship. That's another thing that who would have thought a team would go 11-0 on the road in one playoff year.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk, there are plenty of announcers in here who have been with teams for a very long time. And again, as I said before, we grow up with them, we love them. But are there announcers in this book and the announcers you spoke to that if they were starting out today would not may not get jobs in baseball, or would be starting. Maybe they'd get minor league jobs, but do you know where I'm getting?
Yeah, I think I do. I think that a couple of them are retired now, um, and I don't. And this is not me trying to insult them in any way. I think that
No.
they're the way they called. I think the way they called games were fitting for their age and for their own fan base. But I think that when you have the Ken Hawk Harrelsons of the world, um, obviously kind of more of a homer. And I think a lot of people are starting to become more skeptical about homers, and a broadcaster sounding too much like a fair, a homer of a broadcaster, not given the fair shake. I think that, so not to say that, I don't want to say that Ken Hawk Harrelson wouldn't get a job, but I think that kind of, and I say homerism, I think that kind of homerism has kind of caught enough people's attention that they try to steer away from it. So maybe they wouldn't want that. There's a lot of things that Hawk did that I've heard a lot of people just criticize, but it brought the broadcast for that home broadcast, that WGN broadcast. It brought it to life. I used to listen to WGN because a lot of times the Cubs were on during the day, obviously because of all the rules surrounding playing in that neighborhood. So you go over to the South Side for a night game, and all of a sudden they're covering the White Sox on WGN at night. So I'd get a lot of his calls as well. You can put it on the board, yes. Got it, or what was he said? He gone. Obviously those are things that everybody knows. Yep, that's Hawk Harrelson. So starting fresh, would he be the kind of person that somebody, I don't know. Maybe those calls, would be the saving grace for him. But I think the homerism would be something that would be a deterrent sometimes now for somebody, in the front office trying to hire somebody to be a voice.
Yeah. But homerism, I mean, look, then we just talked about him also in our first discussion. Some people love him, some people don't. But John Sterling was
Yeah.
as homerific as you can get.
I
So,
got to tell you, Lando, John Sterling had one of the greatest calls I ever heard. It was July 4th or July 5th, I guess, going into in
right.
Atlanta. It was a 1980 games. It was fireworks night, and Rick Camp hits a home run, and
Mhm.
it was John Sterling on the call. It's before his Yankee days. It was just the greatest call.
Yeah, he was a great
Yep.
announcer, and he developed the shtick later on. He didn't always have the shtick, and some people love the shtick. They couldn't wait every time when the Yankees would get a new player. They would wonder, what's the first home run call going to be like? What's he going to do? And that got a lot of people's attention, and that got people focused on listening to the game. So I don't fault him. I think it was his style, and it was very entertaining. It could be a bit. It was a lot Homer, but that was
Yeah.
his style, and you could, some people loved it, some people didn't. I enjoyed it.
I enjoy John. I mean, I've been a Yankee fan for a long time. I'm a fan of all the teams except for two. I won't name them. Don't want to alienate those audiences, but yeah, I appreciate John and talking with John for both of my books. My book on Del Murphy, getting Del Murphy into Hall of Fame. I mean, I guess we could have another episode on that. I'm sorry. Maybe that would have been a good right turn to take. But John, uh, he would one of my favorites calls of John's was that year before they traded off Miller and Chapman in 2016, and Miller and Chapman obviously uh, were very effective in the postseason, one in the American League and one in the National League. But he called because it was Dalabatensis, so there's the D. Then you had Miller, and there's the M, and you had Chapman, there's the C. So they called it No Runs DMC. I loved it for 7, 8, 9. No Runs DMC, and I'm a big fan of Run DMC. They were my one of my biggest influences to want to be a drummer as a little kid. Just the beats that they had thrown together and made me want to pick up a pair of drumsticks. So the No Runs DMC was something that hit hard for me because being a fan of the Yankees, being a fan of Run DMC, and just the cleverness of it, and it just flowed. Yes, indeedy. You know, when Didi Gregorius would get a home run, he'd say, "Yes, indeedy," and the day, this might not have been something we discussed before, but when I interviewed John Sterling, it was in Anaheim, and the Angels were playing, and he said how he likes to involve music into the calls, and he loves Broadway, and he loves Bye Bye Birdie. So he says, and I believe it was Brian. Oh man, I'm not going to say it. It was a Brian on the Yankees. I'm not going to waste the time of the episode, but Brian actually, he says, if Brian Roberts, if Brian Roberts ever hits a home run, I'm going to say bye bye Brian. Well, guess who hit the go ahead home run late in the late innings that night? Brian Roberts. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, how prophetic, how prophetic of John to sit there and say that exact night, Brian Roberts hits a home run. The Yankees beat the Angels. And I thought, I wonder if he said bye bye Brian. He was just talking about it an hour or two before in the booth. Did he keep on to it? Did he say it?
Well, what if Greg Bird hit the home run? Then it would have been bye bye birdie. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
John Sterling, before he concentrated on baseball, he was also another, he did other sports. He did hockey, he did basketball. He was a really good announcer before he, concentrated on the Yankees. But
Yeah, I was able to get the junior member of the firm also from John, from his days in Atlanta, like you were mentioning. Like he was just to think, imagine somebody being the junior member of the firm, like somebody like John Sterling saying that. I wonder if he'll ever get in the Hall of Fame. He was on the ballot this year. He'll probably come up again in another couple of years. They gave it to Buck. But yeah, just thinking about that, and you realize Pete Van Weer and Ernie Johnson Sr. and Skip Carey, obviously, that it takes a clout like that, and it takes experience like that for somebody like John Sterling to be the junior member of the firm.
yeah, yeah. Speaking of John, how about John Miller? He's another great announcer. He did Baltimore. He's now doing the Giants, but he also was a national announcer. He's doing ESPN with Joe Morgan. He is just a fantastic announcer. Tell us your conversation with John Miller.
Oh man, that was the first pinch me moment, was when I was right there across the table from John in a Sheridan in Scottsdale during spring training, and typing out John Miller on my interview software. Seriously, I gave pause there. I obviously I didn't do it for too long. I didn't want to affect the interview, but I'm sitting there typing this, and I got a little lump in my throat, like this has actually happened, because a couple of months before, when the idea was there to make this book and to start, talking to broadcasters, it would be like one of those, what would it be like to talk to John Sterling? What would it be like to talk to John Miller? What would it be like to talk to Vin Scully? I was able to get all those what ifs checked off the list within the next 7 or 8 months. But that was the first one where it was like, there was the first check off the list where I talked with John Miller, the voice of my Sundays for years growing up. And so to be able to not only to talk to him about the Giants, but he and I talked a little bit later in the summer, and I still hadn't locked down a Baltimore broadcaster who was current at the time. And he said, well, I broadcast for them for several years. So, I'd be happy to talk with you. And I realized how perfect that circumstance became, because what better way to talk about Camden Yards and its effect on the game being played than to bring in Cal Ripken chasing Lou Gehrig in the summer of '95, and how that ballpark and everything that went into it. Camden Yards is a feather in the cap of modern architecture across all sports. The fact that they took the old and brought in new to look like old. They kept that B&O warehouse. A lot of people were criticizing the fact that Janet Marie Smith, architect for the ballpark, drawing out, kind of planning it out, saying, no, keep that warehouse up, because they're thinking, oh my gosh, no, tear it down. It's a 100-year-old warehouse. It totally obstructs the view of the bay. Let's have the bay in the background, and we watch baseball with the bay. And she says, no, you want something where you want to have the old ballpark feel. We're talking about Larry Lucchino, who had a vision for bringing the old structures and the old neighborhood feel of Fenway Park, of Wrigley Field, bringing that into today. In 1992 is when it opened, but in those couple of years before that, he's trying to bring that old neighborhood feel. And she says, you got to keep that warehouse, and you got to make this ballpark look like it was built the same day that the warehouse was built. And that warehouse was such an integral part of Cal catching Lou Gehrig because of those windows and those numbers being draped from the windows every time he basically the game became official. That was another thing that John was able to walk through people as they were watching the broadcast. Like it's not an official game for Cal if he goes out in the first inning, fields a grounder, they go to the bottom of the inning, he can go sit down for the rest of the game. No, it's not an official game in the books. It's not an official game towards his streak until either the midway part of the fifth inning if they're leading, or once the fifth inning is complete if they're trailing.
Yeah.
And so that right there, and being able to have John Miller tell me all this and be able to lay it out the way that only John Miller can do, it makes that chapter the best chapter in the book, in my personal opinion, because it shows how this really set the course for how ballparks are built now. Look at ballparks like it's now Oracle Park in San Francisco. Look at Petco Park in San Diego. Look at PNC Park in Pittsburgh. There's a few others that I'm probably not even that I should be mentioning, but that old feel and bring that old neighborhood feel and getting that into a today, where as if you were thinking like 1912 when Fenway Park is first opening up, and now it's 2024, 2025. So that's what Camden Yards meant to it. And so to be able to have that captured by John Miller, and to be able to talk about being on the broadcast that night for the Orioles when Cal officially broke the Lou Gehrig's Ironman record. Bill Clinton was in the booth with him that night. I mean, you got the President of the United States in the booth with you. So when you bring somebody in like John Miller, just imagine everything I just said over the last 5 minutes and then expanding it by like 200-fold. That's what he brings, and he remembers everything, and he's not afraid to tell you all the stuff. Like, he's not afraid to share with you this knowledge, and not from an ego perspective or anything like that, just from a storyteller's perspective. And that's why it was so great on Sunday Night Baseball with somebody as versed in the game as a player as Joe Morgan.
Mm-hmm. Kirk, we can go on forever. This has been a great discussion. The name of the book is The Voices of Baseball, the game's greatest broadcasters reflect on America's pastime, the updated edition. Kirk, tell everybody where they can get the book, and tell us about all your social media where people can follow you.
Okay, yeah, you can find the book on Amazon. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's at The Voices of Baseball. Easy enough. And you can follow me on Facebook. I'm usually piping in here or there, especially when baseball season rolls around. So I would say first start with Amazon, get that updated edition, and get familiar with a lot of the stuff that's been happening. New ballparks for the Braves and the Rangers. New World Series for teams like the Nationals, for the Astros. Obviously those kinds of things really make a difference when you take the original edition and you can take the update. You see a lot of things that have happened, and a lot of really building up from the ground up, some things that have transpired and have turned a team completely around. Washington Nationals, perfect example of that. From the original edition to where they hadn't even won a playoff series to actually winning the World Series.
Well,
Kirk, we're still waiting for the book we mentioned last time, Voices of Podcasting. Still waiting for that. You can interview us for the chapter on our show anytime, and we'll actually read. And this is actually serious for the audio version for the Voices of Baseball. It would be amazing if each chapter could be read by a different announcer, but that would be incredible.
That would be the hardest task of all.
Yes, it would. I didn't say it would be easy or possible, but can you imagine, you know, Howie Rose reading his chapter or John Sterling reading his or, all that. That would be that would be unbelievable.
Yeah, that would be pretty awesome.
Much success with the book, Kirk. Thank you very much for joining us on
Thank,
Baseball and BBQ.
Thank you, Kirk.
yeah, thank you guys. Thank you guys. I appreciate it for having me again.